And welcome into Hot Reads. Week 4 of the NFL season is upon us already. I'm Tom Vandervoort, sitting with Hall of Fame quarterback Troy Aikman. And Troy, you get to stay home this week, watch the Cowboys play the Lions. And I want to start with Detroit a little bit because they and Buffalo both off to 3-0 starts. And I was kind of looking back at the records, especially of the Lions, and I was comparing it to your team of the early 90s, because you came in when I think 1-15, 7-9, 11-5, 13-3 in a Super Bowl. Now we've got Detroit 2-14, 6-10. Now they're 3-0, and I'm wondering if you see any parallels at all between this team, this Lions team, and your team.
I do. I really do. And it's funny you bring it up because I was talking to somebody about it just earlier in the week. And you know, I think with Detroit, they're not quite as young as what we were as far as the skill players are concerned. You know, Calvin Johnson's been there a little bit, but you know, Matthew Stafford now in his 3rd year, even though he's been injured, we've certainly seen, you know, his development, especially over the first 3 games of this year. And I think more importantly, to the 3-0 start this year, they ended last season on a 4-game winning streak, and one of those wins was against the Green Bay Packers. So they went into the offseason with some real momentum and confidence, feeling pretty good about their club. Now they've come back. Big win last week at Minnesota. I think a young team that is talented like them is a dangerous team, and they're starting to play with a lot of confidence. You know, earlier in the week I saw a quote by Dominic Raiola, and he said, "No longer are we hoping, we now believe." And so that goes a long, long way. This is not the same old Detroit Lions that are just going into games hoping that they can be competitive and win games. They fully expect to win, and they are.
Now, Tony Romo, another gutsy performance for him. He got banged up, and this was just a wacky game with the Redskins, a bunch of field goals, no touchdowns for the Cowboys. They ended up winning. 3rd and 21, a big play by Tony Romo. But then we also had this strange fumble or a snap problem with the center, Phil Costa, a bunch of receivers who didn't seem to know what they were doing. Tony was very animated in this game. What do you suspect, or what was he telling his teammates on the field there?
Probably not a lot that can you know, be talked about here on the air, but you know, I thought it was good. I thought it was really positive. You know, I think you know, a lot of people have probably been looking for Tony to assert himself a little bit more in those types of situations, and you know, he basically willed that team to victory. As you said, they had a lot of excuses going into that game as to why they wouldn't play well and why they could potentially lose that game. They were without some key guys, and they had to rely on some of those young players who weren't as up to speed on some of the things that they were doing. But Tony was able to get them through it. I thought it was a real positive thing, especially for him playing through the injuries that he is. In fact, Des Bryant, after the ball game, said that had Tony not have played, there's a good chance he wouldn't have played. But when you look over across the locker room and you see your quarterback who's got a punctured lung and a broken rib, and he's suiting up, you know, it kind of puts the pressure on the rest of those guys. So even though it wasn't pretty, that was a big win for that ball club.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I have never in my life seen messed up snaps that many times in a ball game. What was going on there? Was it in fact the Redskins doing something to mess up the snap count there?
You know, sometimes there's games in there at the line of scrimmage, you know, amongst the defensive players, but I don't think that was the case. What's funny about that situation for the Cowboys is that Andre Gerard, who's no longer on the team, but who had been the center for the Cowboys for the previous 4 or 5 seasons, he would do the same things. I mean, I broadcasted a number of games to where he was snapping the ball whenever he was ready. Tony wasn't ready, and now all of a sudden, you know, Monday night we're seeing the same thing with an entirely different center. I don't know if it's something that Tony's doing in order to try to neutralize the defensive front, and he's confusing maybe his own guy, but we've seen it now from a couple of different centers, and I can tell you as a quarterback, when you're not sure that the center is going to snap the ball when he's supposed to, and it may come early, it becomes very, very frustrating, because then it's more and more difficult to try to get a pre-snap read with the defense, or you know, change the call at the line of the scrimmage because you're not certain that the center is going to hold in there and not snap the ball prematurely.
Yeah, now speaking of frustration, another guy that was frustrated, Michael Vick down there in Philadelphia, pretty clear after the game. He felt like he wasn't getting the same kind of calls as far as getting hit in the pocket that other guys have. Number one, does he have a point? And number two, you know, we hear a lot about players in basketball and coaches in basketball working the refs. And can this kind of comment have an effect on the referees?
I think there is probably some evidence of him not getting some calls. I think that the part of the problem for Michael Vick or maybe problem's not a good word, maybe part of the issue with him not getting some calls that he feels that he deserves is because he's such a mobile guy that when he's moving around, and we all know that that's a part of his game, that they don't view him as strictly a pocket passer like they would a Tom Brady or like they would a Peyton Manning when he's playing, or a Drew Brees. I think those guys are more inclined to get some of those calls as opposed to someone who's pretty athletic and moves around outside the pocket. I don't think it's a conscious effort, certainly, by the officials, but he takes a lot of hits, and there's no doubt about that. I think it came out of frustration as to why he said it. I think the frustration had more to do with the loss than it did the hits. I think if they were winning, he probably wouldn't have been as vocal as what he was. What's going to be the long-term effect of saying something? I don't know. I think Michael's very well respected around the league. I think he's certainly respected amongst the officials, that it could be a positive thing. But I do know that as a quarterback, it's not something you really want to focus a lot of attention or a lot of energy on. Just let the officials do their job.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate your time this week. Great insight as always, and we'll be back next week to catch up with you a little more.
Look forward to it. Thank you.